Welcome everybody to another photobook show with Stefan Frank. This is number 14. And for those of you who are new, in this series, Stefan looks at recent and not so recent photo-related books, I'm saying today, slightly different, that you might or might not know about. And today's subject is the photo essay, Putting Photos into Words. And I am Anja from StrudelmediaLive. We offer online photography classes to people all around the world. And yeah, thanks for being here. I want to briefly talk about upcoming events and classes. And Stefan will also teach a series of mini workshops about AI photography. There will be 3 mini workshops. Our mini workshops are 1 session only, and they only cost $39 each. So check those out on our website. Susana Pustajova from Slovakia will teach a class about the performative self-portrait. And we will also have a class on camera-less photography. That will be a new course, and many other classes. Go to our website, check out the classes. There's quite a long list right now. The talk will be about an hour long, and I think that's enough for me here. And I want to welcome all of you, and also especially thank Stefan for another episode of his photobook show. So Stefan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anja, and thank you so much, everybody, for showing up here today for this episode of the photobook show that will be a little bit different today, because this will be the one that has no photos in it. So today we'll be talking about, not about photo books, not about books that contain photographs, but books that contain words that are about photographs. So the photo essay. The title, put photos into words. Shift stuff around here a little to make sure that I can read everything here. Oh, that's better. So the title of the show comes from Ariella Azoulay, who wrote one of the books we will be talking about today. So she said she started writing on photography in the 70s. She is a curator, a writer, and a filmer. And she was looking at that time at the landscape of writings on photography. And she noticed that there was very little writing on photography within the discourse of art. She comes from this background of art, not immediately from journalism. And she was looking for a way to put photographs into words. So she was just learning the ropes on how to write about photography. So this is where the title comes from. This will be very very personal. I think these kinds of encounters with photo books for me are always very personal encounters. They are structured by my biography. So one of the first photo books I ever read is, like we all do, Susan Sontag's On Photography, which is one of the most famous photo books from written in 1977. And I was just starting out with photography. I was madly in love with photography. And like everybody who is madly in love, I was not really happy about this book because she pointed out a lot of flaws of photography. And when you're madly in love, you do not want to hear that the loved one has some flaws in it. So my major concern when I read this book is why the heck is she so grumpy all the time? So she's always complaining about photography. So where does it come from? I only later realized that I probably was that book hit me a little early, so it would probably have been better to read it later when your love has matured to the point that you're actually able to see the flaws of the things you love and take them in with the respect that they require to deal with it. But this was one of the photo books, one of the rare books that was really influential on the photo world. Like many of these photo books, this book was a compilation of articles that she wrote in the at different places, mostly in the New York Book Review. So she started writing on photography. Her writing on photography is part of her work. It's not the main part of her work. It is very important for the photography world, but it was not so, does not have the stature in her work. So she wrote these articles on photography. Eventually, she slapped a front cover and a back cover on it and called it a book. This is a scheme that you will find with a lot of these essay books. They collect articles that circulate around a certain topic, like in this case on photography, but they were not necessarily constructed in a way to go together in a book. This was very influential because Susan Sontag at that time was already pretty famous, so that got her got the idea that you can write about photography in a meaningful way and actually can derive something about not only about photography, but also about the society that uses photography. That got this idea a lot of traction. So she was very inspirational for a lot of people that started writing on photography at that time. She continued doing that with one other book, which became very important, the book regarding the pain of others, which was mostly on conflict photography, on war photography. You see here on the front cover, Don McCulling's Shell-Shocked Soldier. This was a high time of war photography journalism. The Vietnam War was just over, and there she deconstructed that legend that photography somehow was instrumental in ending this war. And she talks about how conflict photography is instrumental for societies that deal with these kinds of conflicts. I will vastly oversimplify her book with this one, because this will eventually become important for us. She constructs conflict photography as a construction of otherness. So wars, famines, catastrophes are things that happen to other people, and photographs make this consumable to the viewer of photos that see these pictures in a magazine or in a newspaper. So this was her idea that the conflict photography was not, so she was focusing on the people, on the photographers who did the work, and on the audience that consumed this work. Another very important book, you probably will encounter this in your career one time or other, is of course Camera Lucida, La Chambre Claire by Roland Barthes. This was a huge thing in the 80s, and this has over time become some kind of a photographic drinking game. So whenever you pull out an essay from somebody else, there will eventually be a quote of Roland Barthes somewhere in there. And if you do this into a drinking game, there's a good chance that you will end up pretty drunk at the end of the evening. Interesting here is that already the headlines, or the chapter headlines that you see here, I'm very enthusiastic about these kinds of headlines. So whenever I counter this in a photo book, there are a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff here that starts interesting me immediately. Central to this book is the idea, the difference between studium and punctum. So this is what everybody is referencing all the time. So studium is basically the idea that there's a contract between the creator and the consumer, and the photographer sets up the photo in a way that he wants to show you a certain thing. He wants to get across a certain message, and he uses his art, his compositional skills, his technical skills to transport what he wants you to see. And Studium is then used by the consumer, so the viewer of this image, to extract this information that the photographer put in here. Let me focus quickly on this idea that there's a contract between the creator and the consumer. So he basically, just like Susan Sontag, they are all focusing on the photographer, so the one that does the work, and the viewer that eventually looks at the images. So this is Studium. So, but the core of this is Punctum. So the idea that there's always something inexplicable in great images, and something that grabs you, something that is at the core of the fascination that makes up photography. He brings a lot of examples here. So in contrast to Studium, which is some kind of way, there's some kind of universalism to Studium. So you can derive, when you know the cultural context, the context of the image, you can derive Studium. Punctum is very personal. And I'm always reminded that this is very personal when he explains about this picture by William Klein from his series, from his New York series from 1954, that he's looking at this image and he says, what I thoroughly see are only the boy's bad teeth. So he's focusing on a very little tiny detail in these images. And this is something from which he derives the whole idea of the picture. And of course, this is entirely personal, and it becomes even more personal for Roland Barthes. So the one other punctum that he talks about is noemas. So the idea that a photo is something that shows you it has been this way. So these persons that you see in the photos, they actually exist. They were there at that point in time when the photo was taken. And this can have dramatic consequences here. So one of the examples that he says, that he talks about, is this picture of, sorry, I've got stuff in the way here. Let me get this out of the way. So one picture he's talking about is this picture of Louis Payne. He was an assassin. He tried to kill the American foreign minister, and was caught with it before he could actually kill him, and was sentenced to death. So Alexander Gardner visited him in his cell half an hour before he was actually hanged. So, and Barthes talks about this collapse of time that we see here in this picture. So, of course, a lot of pictures that you look at, you see that the people existed, but they are already gone. So a lot of people are dead. But here he says, this is a special situation. This is a situation where he looks at you and he already knows that he will be dead in half an hour. So there's a different collapse of time happening here. So he is already dead when we look at it, but we see that he knows that. The other picture, this is somehow the miracle of camera lucida. So the other picture that he's talking about is not actually in the book. It is a picture of his mother, and this is the pivotal moment in this book when he talks about this picture of his mother as a young child, when he suddenly realizes that his mother has once been young and she existed before he even existed. So there was a time when she was there and he was not. And the moment, this Punkte moment came when he actually realized, okay, this young woman is actually his mother that he sees in the picture. And weirdly enough, the picture of his mother is absent from the book. So it's one of the most famous pictures not seen. So it was not found in the leftovers from Moyra. So we don't know this picture. And this was one of, so Camera Lucida is one of the photo essay book that gets quoted all the time, that everybody works on. So this is one example here. There is a very interesting project from Odette England. She did it in 2020, where she asked around 200 photography-based artists to say what interests you about Roland Barthes. And she explicitly quotes here that this missing photograph here. So the question, what is there left to say about Camera Lucida, is still unanswered. So people are still continuing to quote Camera Lucida and work on the ideas that Roland Barthes put in there. So these two pictures, so these two books on photography and Camera Lucida, this is pretty much the canon that everybody can agree on. From here on, things get a little bit more personal. So and a little bit less clear what the status of this book is. For me, it was Michael Fried, Why Photography Matters as Art as Never Before. For a couple of reasons, it was very important for me because it had this, it talked a lot about the Düsseldorf school of photography that is very close to me because I come from Germany, and it was interesting for me to hear how the Bechers and the Düsseldorf school conceptualized photography. Michael Fried is not, makes sure that we all know that he is coming from a serious art background. So you will find in this book a lot of Heidegger quoting, about a lot of Lacan quoting, and weirdly enough, also a lot of Michael Fried quoting. So because he wrote some very important articles in the 60s already that had nothing to do with photography, but he's building on that. So half of the quotes that you find in the book are of his own work. Still, nevertheless, for me, it was very important, even when I revisited it today. It's not that I understand it much better than at the time when I read it first, but at least now I recognize the things that I don't understand a little bit quicker. So one of the things that he talks about when he opened up a weird corner of photography that until then I did not know. So here we are looking at Jeff Wall's addressing poetry. So the book is pretty much centered on the work of Jeff Wall. And you probably know that Jeff Wall does not do photojournalism. So all his pictures are constructed. So he carefully constructs and reconstructs tiny little moment that he observes, and then he restages it. And even what you look here is carefully restaged in a studio and then rephotographed. And this can be shattering. So I remember that I have been to an exhibition with my wife, and she was outraged when she looked at this photo and found out, okay, this photo is not real. It is not the scene that we're looking at. And interestingly enough, this has a different concept of this idea of noemas, because it is weird to reason about this photo in a way to see, has it really been there? Because it has been there, but also has been staged. It has been set up only to be photographed. So it opened up for me a weird corner of photography. From here on, it gets even more personal. I will not talk much more about Handful of Dust, but David Campany is one of the guys that you probably want to know in this regard. This is one of my favorite books because he is able to make a whole book about one little picture, and the picture only shows a handful of dust. David Campany also has this connection to Susan Sontag, so eventually he made this book. There is again the Susan Sontag quote on photographs, and this book goes back to an encounter that David Campany actually had with Susan Sontag, who started his career into writing and photography, because she said to him, so maybe one day you will also make a book on photographs. And see here, so he did eventually. But before we go further into the future, let's pause here a moment and go a little bit back into the past. All this kind of this idea that you can write about photography, this was championed by Walter Benjamin, who was an art critic and writer and sociologist in the 1930s in Weimar, Germany. And right at the beginning of photography, started already writing over photography. And that is this, I want to point out this tiny little essay that he wrote, Kleine Geschichte der Fotografie, Small History of Photography, which he wrote in 1931. And it contained already, it contained these names of his contemporaries, people that were working around the time when he was alive. And when you see this list, you already see how important this little essay was, because he already mentioned a lot of photographers whose career would become very important for the history of photography, like August Sander, Eugenia G. And what an accomplishment to be alive at that time, to see these people working and to realize at that time, when nobody else was talking too much about photography, already recognizing their importance for the history of photography. So, of course, he then went on to the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. So he was single-handedly inventing the idea of some kind of media theory. This was something that was not really done at that time. So everybody was focused on what you see on the photograph. And here he was focusing on the idea of how does a photograph change how we perceive the world, how we perceive an artwork when we can reproduce it. So he was single-handedly responsible for writing some of the most important essays of the early 20th century. And I only want to point out one of my favorite books ever. So this is Berliner Kindheit 1900, Berlin Childhood around 1900, a book that was never published during his lifetime. And this is certainly, at least to me, one of the most beautiful books of the German language. So when you are looking for an excuse to read, to learn German, here I give you one. So this is something, this is one of the pinnacles of German literature. And it is only a very, very small book that contains these small vignettes of his childhood. And here he made important advances in the idea of what an essay is. He made these vignettes work already like tiny little photographs. So he looks at the surroundings, but he takes tiny little details of his surrounding, a kitchen, a salon, and the things that he sees in there, a Gummibaum, so a tree that is used in the salon. And from this, he derives a whole sociology out of it. So he was one of the first who interweaved his personal experiences with sociological insights. And I could go on. So Walter Benjamin then continued with One Way Street, another book where he weaved personal insights, personal events with sociological insights. So he was one of the people who were the very important for this vibrant cultural setup of the 20s and 30s in Germany and in Europe. And of course, we know how this story ended. So this height of photography, of culture, of art and literature that we had in the 20s and the 30s, that of course ended violently when the Nazis marched in. And I'm always whenever I currently look at the political situation and I prepare for these kinds of talks, this is something that comes to mind, that all of this is very fragile, and this is a situation that where we see how fragile democracy actually is. And from this pinnacle of culture, from this mountain of culture with people that were with these advances in science and literature and photography, we went basically to degree zero through the Nazis. And after the war, we had to reconstruct everything in Europe. And this is why I want to point out Dorothea Fink's course here on mosaic and entanglement, because she's actually dealing with this very important moment of how do you actually come back from this degree zero, from this zero level, and how did that work in photography? So certainly an interesting course here. What we can learn from Benjamin and from this essays is the question, why do we actually use this? Why do we actually read on photography? What's the use of it? I'm not really sure that it will make you a better photographer, because you cannot go from there and say, okay, what makes a good photograph? This is usually not what these essays are about. What they deal with is that the reading of pictures is a cultural ability that has to be learned. So looking at pictures closely and examining how their context is, how they can be read, that they actually need not to be looked at, but they actually need to be read like a book. This is something that comes out of these essays. So these kinds of essays, these dealings with photography is a part of visual literacy. And we assume that we can all look at a picture and understand it. This is certainly not the case. Now, I just want to point out one thing here, so which I think is for our time really important: the idea of reading the pictures. So this is a website that deals with current press photos and deconstructs them and shows you how they are constructed, in what cultural context, into what cultural context they belong. So this is important for us to keep our head above the water, that above this rising flood of political misinformation, because we have to understand what we're actually looking at when we're looking at a photo. So this is the basic background on which all the writers we'll be looking at today, on which they stand. So today we will be looking at 5 of these books, with every author has a different approach to deal with this idea of writing on photography. So we will look at Tim Carpenter, Hervé Guibert, French photographer and writer, and Moyra Davey, a British photographer and filmmaker, Teju Cole, and we'll end with Ariella Azoulay. Let me quickly talk about this one. So this is Tim Carpenter, which I really want to like this book. The book has a great title. The title, To Photograph is to Learn How to Die, references an essay, very famous essay by Michel de Montaigne, who famously wrote that to study philosophy is to learn how to die. And so this is something that drew me immediately to this book. quoting Montaigne and quoting this idea that photography is somehow a practice that teaches you a better death, and in a better death always lies a better life. So he's coming in with very high stakes here, and as I said, I really want to like this book, but I actually don't. So I found it really hard to actually read it. It consists of mainly quotes, I have to say. There's a lot of quoting going on here. He has 3 different strands of narrative here, so his own voice, then the voice of these quotes, and then a third voice of extensive comments on these quotes. And as you see here, he's putting this in different types. And if you see here, if you look at the quotes, he has a lot of quotes in here, and he eventually says, okay, I'm tired of actually spelling out these names here, so I will shorten Paul Eluard to PE. So, and all of this makes reading this thing very confusing. I have to be honest with you, I did not manage to get through this because it is so confusing. It, on the plus side, it helps you, it gets you into reading. So, but not this book, but mainly the book that he references. I'm not sure that he did not get me with the other things that he wrote himself. I found a lot of the things that he wrote himself very preposterous, very bloated, and in the end a little bit trivial, and it did not really hold up to the quotes he was using. So, but maybe it's just I did not understand what he was about. So maybe you have to buy it and find out yourself. But this is my impression of this. And I just wanted to show you this because he's getting a lot of traction with this, and he's getting pretty much getting some good reviews, and I still find it hard to understand the reviews. So maybe you have to make up your own mind with this. And I just want to get this out of the way because I want to get to this one. So this is one of my favorite books on photography. This is Hervé Guibert's Ghost Image. So the original French title of this is Image Fantôme. So it's a phantom image. So which is can be read in both ways. So it is first the image of a ghost, but it's also the way that the police are reconstructing unknown persons just by description. And this is the picture that describes to me his method very precisely. So this consists of a whole lot of tiny little bits of prose on photography. Just let me read you one. So this is the hotel room. A hotel room that can't be photographed, that you have no desire to photograph, is already a bad room. Upon arriving in a city, the first thing to do is to take a picture of the room, as if to stake out a territory, and photograph your reflection in the mirror, as if to mark your temporary belonging, as if to attenuate the cost, as a testimony of your presence. Or you can occupy the room immediately by making love in it. And this is the kind of writing that he does. So he has this very elaborate, he has this very short notes that he makes, and then he has this flash at the end where he just shortcuts into something. He's a writer he's a photographer, so you could know him from his book, The Friend Who Did Not Save My Life. He was friend with Michel Foucault, and he wrote this book, The Friend Who Did Not Save My Life, about his own AIDS illness. And he was friends with Michel Foucault, and when his book came out, he basically outed the deaths of Michel Foucault as being AIDS related. So, and this was something that the family did not want to get out. So that caused some kind of scandal in France at the time, because AIDS at that time, at the at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, was still something that has some kind of stigma on it. And he was among some of the people that were instrumental in changing this view on AIDS and stirring up a lot of change there. So in 1991, he died himself from AIDS. So his life was tragically shortcut by this illness. And he only wrote a few of these images. So this is the Friend Who Did Not Save My Life is one. This is one of the others. And the other ghost image in here is, and here we come back to the unseen image of Roland Barthes. So the other ghost image here, so careful, here come some spoilers, is an image of his mother. So he describes elaborately how he tried as a young adult. He tried to make a photograph of his mother, and he describes the whole session and how he felt in this way and how beautiful his mother was in that moment and how proud he was to capture this moment. Only eventually to notice that the film had not been transported. There was nothing coming out of it. So this is how this book is constructed. It has these wonderful observations and these marvelous endings here. Highly recommend. This is one that I can highly recommend. This one, if you want to read something about photography and life, this is the thing to go with. Talking of photography and life, so this is Moyra Davey's index cards. This is, of course, it has the inevitable Barthes quotes in Roland Barthes quotes in here. It has the Benjamin quotes. So this is where these ideas come from. Okay, we are all in this context of these on how these people wrote. Moyra Davey is a photographer, a videographer. She makes films, she writes. And this is a wonderful book that describes, and creates the book and describes the way it is created. So she's using index cards just like this, and she writes her ideas, her quotes, her interests on these index cards. And she's using these index cards eventually to assemble them into these long winding essays. This has two cores. So the one core is the goddesses, which is on the three daughters of Mary Wollstonecraft, who was an early feminist in the 18th century, and she was mother to Mary Shelley, who eventually wrote Frankenstein, and was married to Percy Shelley. So very much in contrast to this thing, which I think is really without blood. This is full of blood. So she describes how she lives together with these quotes, with the literature these people wrote. So there's a lot of interweaving of personal life, her illness, how she recovers from this illness, how she recovers from a jet lag by reading Walter Benjamin, his experience with hashish in Marseille. So all of this goes in and out of her private life and interweaves her private life and her private experience with some sort of of living together with literature. So this is about her, but it's also about photography, because photography is part of her life. So there are essays here on notes on photography and accident. There is this core of this with index cards where she describes her method of writing. And overall, this is a wonderful book, and you see that it has been used and read a couple of times. So it's really a wonderful book to read all over again. Let me, looking quickly at the clock here, let me quickly show you Black Paper by Teju Cole, because he shows another way of how what essays on photography can do. This is, to me, it is a mixed bag. Like it is very similar to Susan Sontag, who wrote a lot of articles and published them before she assembled everything in the book form. This is very similar. So these are, this is a mixed bag of articles Teju Cole wrote for magazine, for the back of books. And in turn, this means that the quality of the essays here in here are also a little bit a mixed bag. Some of them are marvelous. So this here, Shadow Cabinet on Kerry James Marshall, was a black painter who made black paintings. This is a marvelous essay. He constructs a marvelous idea of blackness, not only in the skin of color, but also in the way that it is used in painting. So he connects blackness to the shadows, but shadows not as absence of light, but as actual beings. So that is really a marvelous essay. Some of the essays are a little bit hard to read, so it's sometimes you need to know a lot of stuff about the people he writes about. Some of them are beautiful, like here, this in Shattered Glass, which brings us into our next topic of conflict photography, where he talks about how to depict horror in photography. So overall, it's a mixed bag. It has some brilliance in it. It has some weak spots, but overall, it's a wonderful book. Which brings me to another idea of how these essays can work. This is one of the hallmarks of modern photographic theory. This is a complex book. This is The Civil Contract of Photography by Ariella Azoulay. She was born in Tel Aviv. She's a curator, a filmmaker, a theoretist, a writer. She studied in Paris and Tel Aviv. And being a Jew with Algerian origins, she grew up with the conflict between Israel and Palestine. So this is her background. So this is how she describes her upbringing. So the conflict was, like it is always in Israel, was always in Israel. It is always present, and the pictures of Palestinians are also present in this society. We had this idea that she makes the core of this book is the idea that photography is a contract not between 3 persons, but between 4 persons. So she conceptualizes photography as a contract between the photographed, the camera, the photograph, and the spectator. And these 4 persons, none of them have full control about about how this civil contract plays out. And this is the reason why I mentioned this Susan Sontag and Roland Barthes. They are very much focused on the one side of the photographer and the spectator. And Azoulay is rethinking these ideas with the simple idea that people pose for photographs. So like here, there is a Palestinian whose shop was raided by the Israeli occupation forces, and he shows the lock that they have broken, and he puts it into the camera. And excuse me. And from this simple idea that the people who are photographed participate in the photograph, she introduces them into this civil contract, and she explicitly writes, let me read you this sentence too, because I think it is very important for us. So I employ the term contract in order to shed terms such as empathy, shame, pity, or compassion as organizers of this gaze. In the political sphere that is reconstructed through the civil contract, photographed persons are participant citizens, just the same as I am. Within the space, the point of departure for our mutual relations cannot be empathy or mercy. It must be a covenant for the rehabilitation of the citizenship in the political sphere within which we are all ruled, that is, in the state of Israel. For her, this conflict between Palestine and Israel is a compromise of citizenship. So this is the place from which she comes. And the interesting part and the generalized part for this is to say a photograph in this way constructs some kind of citizenship that is transnational, that has nothing to do with the nation state to which the people belong, or that denies them their citizenship, but it constructs a citizenship, again, contained by the photograph, the camera, the photograph, and the spectator. And we have to take all these members of this contract into account. And I find this idea to be, this is really a revelation, because it sometimes gives you the option to say, as a photographer, I am not in control. The person that I photograph is not totally in control. The camera is not totally in control, and the spectators are not totally in control of what this contract means for all of us. But still, we enter a civil contract with each other. And this is a book that was this idea of a civil contract that we all enter together. This is something that she plays out through different aspects of this of photography in the Israel-Palestinian relations here. This is a book that was already written in 2008, but it helps to understand this conflict a little bit better, and it also helps to understand our roles as photographers in these conflicts a little bit better. So it's not an easy book to read. It's not an easy book to digest, because it has a lot of gruesome photography in there. It has a lot of gruesome topics in there, but I think it's a very important one to read. And that was the last book that I wanted to talk about. So,
wow, thank you for so much exciting reading material. My goodness. I posted these books into the chat in case anybody wants to check them out further. Maybe you let me stop. Okay, now we can see you better, Stefan. Are there any questions from anybody about the materials that Stefan presented just now? This would be the moment to ask. I'm very excited that so many people stayed. You know, the reason why I'm saying it this way is because I was concerned that some people might think, well, the photo essay, that means a sequence of photographs. But obviously that's not what you were talking about today. So I'm very happy that people are interested also in the written word that has to do with photography. Edward, did you say something?
Yes, Arsh Kapasi has raised his hand. Has a
Very
question.
good. Okay, Arsh, please.
Hello, thank you. I wanted to ask how accessible the essays were, and like, can anyone read and get stuff easily from the essays, or do you have, or are they like philosophical texts which are harder and you need a lot of history and context for understanding them?
Let me. That is an excellent. That is an excellent question, and you're totally right. So this is the reason why I said I started with Susan Sontag, and I said, okay, Susan Sontag hit me at a point in time where I was at a weird place in photography and was maybe too early for me. So it would be better if I had read it later. But let me try to rate these books in terms of accessibility. So this is something that you can read and get something out of it because of two reasons. Because it's very well written. So it just reads.
Hold on one second. I need to spotlight this.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
And this has something because it has these tiny little moments where he describes his practice as a photographer. Like, I'm photographing my mother, and this is how it felt. And this is very something that you can relate to, that I can relate to very immediately because it's very practical. It's how he talks a lot about how to experience photography in a very practical sense. You really get the feeling, okay, he's a practical photographer. He brings a camera all the time, and he is very good at writing about this experience. So this is the one that I would highly recommend it just to get into this. He's also the one with no Roland Barthes quote and no Susan Sontag quote. So he basically has no quote. So you can read this without knowing anything about anything and can get into it. Let me continue with this. I think Teju Cole is accessible because he is very current. So he's very close to current current developments in how photography works today, how it is important for the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, how it is important to construct what function does it have to construct Black identity. And this is something that you can get into if you just have an open mind and follow the news and follow this current discussions. And he approaches this from a very current viewpoint. Here it gets a little bit more complex, but I love Moyra Davey because she writes very good, and it is a very good entry into the people that she quotes. You do not necessarily need to know anything about Goethe, but when you start reading this, you will eventually be interested in Goethe or in Jean Genet. So, and this is the thing that works like some kind of a gateway drug into more of into the writers and the photographers she's talking about. And she's, on the other hand, she's very relatable because she derives this living together with literature and photography as a practice of her own life. So, and this, as I said, this is this is a tough read. I can't deny that. So this is a tough read. So you really have to work through this to understand this idea of a civil contract of photography. It is at some points, it is a tough read because the topic that she's talking about is really tough. She then goes into deriving from very practical examples of photographs in the newspaper. She then goes into theory there. So this is something that you really need to work through. Yeah, I will not talk too much about this one. So it's, yeah. So this would be my recommendation. So this is something you should read it right now. So it's just a good read. Does it answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good question. Good question. All right. Thank you so much, Stefan. Very inspiring once again, as always.
It's my pleasure.